Good afternoon. Good afternoon again. Good to see you all. I hope everybody had got enough to eat for lunch. So I introduced myself yesterday. Jackie Swift, Comanche, Fort Sill, Apache from Oklahoma, the great state of Oklahoma. So I want to welcome you all here again. Thank you all for your patience. It's been a long week and we're bringing up the rear here, so appreciate that. So really what this talk is about is we have a little bit of a modification again with our panelists, but it's still really cool, and I hope you'll get a lot out of it. This is that how-to process. And what I want to do is talk about briefly about the National Museum of the American Indians International Repatriation Process, with the understanding that NMAI is unique. We understand the sort of the unique process and situation that we're in, and it's through our policy that that we're able to conduct international repatriations with First Nations and Indigenous communities in Latin America. And in fact, we've been doing that for the past 31 years. Since 1992, as a matter of fact, NMAI has conducted 30 international repatriations, where 22 of those have been to First Nations in Canada, and 6 have been to Indigenous communities in Latin America. And during the course of that time, the process and procedures they've changed and evolved. And so just to make clear, you know, when we're talking about NMAI doing an international repatriation, we are making the return. We're making the physical return of ancestral remains or cultural items from NMAI's collections back to the communities of origin, not countries of origin, communities of origin. So, and I think that's helpful to explain, because there are times where folks call us and make that assumption that we're working with European nations to bring items back, and so that's not the case. We're working with specifically with items under NMAI stewardship. So I want to share this information with the hopes that that this might provide an opportunity, should you find yourself in similar circumstances, that some of these techniques might help. And I think the important thing is that it's not to imply that that this is the only way. We continue to build on this process ourselves. So I think one of the things that I want to drill home is that understanding that it's about anticipating the process and circumstances of your unique situation and communicating with the government agencies within and outside the U.S. well in advance of your travel and your repatriation, because I guarantee you that will help lower your stress substantially. And I'm also going to be a little honest here. You think you kind of need to be let's call it proactive about following up with government agencies and, maintaining that. Like, if you're having a tough time getting a hold of an agency, don't let it go, because you're going to need that help and assistance. And, but it's also the reality that we're all stretched a little thin these days. I got to make sure I'm on the right slide. So, to get to that, here's some realities. For better or worse, here's some things to consider. Okay, you've had the situation, European museums, like, yes, we're going to repatriate, but we're not going to help you. We're not going to help you do it. Here it is. You can pay for it, you can ship it, you can do, it's on you on how it gets back. Well, there's that, right? And then there's also, well, what if your tribe doesn't want to work through the U.S. government? Or what if they just want it in a limited way? They want that assistance in a very limited way. Well, I think in any of these situations, that your fallback is really always knowledge is power, right? What is it going to take to bring these ancestral remains or cultural items home? What does that process look like? And who does what? So sometimes you need to be mindful of what you do on one side of the border likely has a counter complement on the other side of the border, such as CBP and CBSA in the US, or a different government agency. And I realize it can feel confusing, but with the appropriate preparation and understanding, and understanding the permitting process, the permitting process for each country, connecting well in advance with these agencies or entities is really going to be helpful, even if you're not doing it yourselves. It's knowing exactly what that process is and who's doing what as an agency or as an individual. And so here's, kind of speaking in a little bit of the detail, here's a simple strategy that NMAI has employed that I wanted to share with you guys. So typically NMAI does all the footwork necessary to ensure that all items are returned home safely, and that's regardless if an NMAI staff member is doing the escort or if it's a tribal representative. And I'm just going to skip past all of the internal NMAI paperwork, and I'm going to jump right to this thing that we just, uncreatively call the travel memo, because it has really evolved over time. And it's the type of document or thing that you can think about that can be custom tailored and really for either domestic or international repatriation. And we use it today, and really the intention of this memo is it's to provide a government official a simple consolidated look at the purpose of the escort, along with the important part, which is the request not to open the items. And where we can avoid any unnecessary cultural trauma, that is the point. And so what I want to do is break this process down. So in this first paragraph here, we date it for the actual date of travel. And we do things like we're identifying the tribal nation and the specific names of individuals who will serve as those couriers. And it is very, very important to make sure that you're using the name on their passports. That's a detail. You don't want to mess that one up. We provide a description of the items, and for NMAI, we use the catalog card and the catalog number just for consistency, because they're going to see that again. And then the purpose, we're identifying that the purpose of this is for an approved repatriation, and we're conducting that repatriation under this legal authority, which is under the NMAI Act. And actually, it's under the NMAI's repatriation policy, which allows us to work in the spirit of the law. And so in the second paragraph, make sure I'm on the second paragraph, we want to provide that understanding that, yes, these items have been packed in a manner that they can be x-rayed. But the important part of this is that that's the ask, right? We're asking that due to cultural sensitivities that these items not be opened. It could be, a box, a suitcase, a container, whatever is being transported, that they not be opened. And so this is based on a hand escort. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page for that. But the purpose of that is that the items not be opened. And so still on the second paragraph, this is really super simplified, and it really doesn't convey all of the time and patience and resource hours that are involved to get to this point, especially if you're needing any kind of government permitting. So, as necessary, you can include things that are appropriate where a museum might be in the best position to answer that. And here we have an example of an integrated pest management program where we're addressing items that may have contained like wood or fur, hair, leather, skin. But it's in the permitting process. If you've got items that need CITES permits, that need migratory bird permits, those are time-intensive processes that you need to anticipate. We had a situation like that during COVID, and that was a bear. It was a process to do the application, but the bigger issue was the window of time on the back end. On the back end, when they provide you with, here's your permits, you have a window of time to work with. And it feels very much like the clock is ticking. So this doesn't really fully explain that, but it encapsulates that idea. Or perhaps you just need a U.S. Fish and Wildlife declaration, a 3177. So it really is this sort of consolidated form of all the work that you've done wrapped up into one. And the third paragraph, that's our name dropping paragraph. So that really is identifying all of the government agency contacts that you've been working with on this specific repatriation, I should say. And typically here, NMAI is going to ask our registrar to sign this document. And so further, what we do will include the names and the agency contact names and emails, all of that, their cell phone number, because if people are traveling and an incident, something happens, you want to be able to get in touch with who that agency contact is. And as you can see here, we'll also include those, again, back to the repatriation, the actual details. So catalog card, detailed information detailed description for each item, individual measurements, and if appropriate, an image of the item. And here you can see this item over here on my right. That's an example of where we didn't include an image. That wasn't just for you guys, that's highlighted. That was literally, we did not include the image. And that's okay, right? So we've gone to the extent of including the image of the actual container. And you can see the little cup for scale, right? We've provided measurements. I mean, you can do all of these things because the more your agency contact where they're going to engage on this, the more that they know in writing, visually, all of that is going to be super helpful. And in some cases, we've even exchanged photos or other descriptive information, and that can be between the folks escorting and that agency official, and then that way they'll know what each other looks like when they get to a busy airport, right? Or a port of entry. It could be like the make, model, license plate of a car. It could be all of those things that will just help facilitate and ease that process. And I've included this one here. This was from the repatriation that we did in Ecuador a few months back. And what I thought was interesting was that I guess they thought our memo was sufficient enough that they incorporated it into their memo. And they had a front-end memo, and all of it was consolidated together, and it included a copy of our itinerary, a very detailed schedule, along with the MOU. And then they stuck their stamp on it. And I was like, that's interesting, that's cool. But I wanted to make a comment about the MOU in listening to Professor Anaya's talk this morning, because he said, where you can underscore and advocate, those standards and mechanisms for international repatriation and realizing, we in NMAI's repatriation policy, we reference the UNDRIP, but I don't know if it was included in this MOU, but it made me think, why not? If it wasn't, it should have been. And it's like, note to self going forward, that's an opportunity where you can include that and underscore those kinds of efforts. So that was a real note to self for me this morning. So, I'm just going to take a real quick drink here. So the thing is that this isn't an official memo, right? It really is this consolidated way to provide a significant amount of information and work in a very tight space. And I mentioned earlier that, you know, this form was really made to give to that government official, you know, when you get there, when you encounter with somebody, you know, so that they won't open the document. But we tell our travelers, especially, you know, tribes, if they're doing that escort, you know, it's not official. And at the end of the day, it might not matter, right? It's you might just get that one guy. You get that one guy who's like, I don't care about your memo. I'm going to open it anyway. But it's something. It's something, so it's not foolproof. But one of the things that we discovered, which I think is relevant and most important to share with you all, is that because of this front-end work that we've done, working all of this, that, you know, putting it all together, talking with these agencies in advance, one of the things that we discovered was we would provide this information, just like with the Ecuadors, they put their stamp on it and, you know, incorporated their documents into it. But they would run it up and down their chains of you know, interaction. All of those places where it needed approval, all of those places where it was necessary to see, so it would be those checkpoints. And it's become incredibly helpful. As a matter of fact, I don't think one person has been asked to show that paperwork because they've already anticipated their arrival. And so it's been a really, really helpful document for us. And, you know, at the end of the day, I would just advocate, you know, working with a government agency in advance. And, you know, they do want to help, but nobody wants to be blindsided. They're there to do a job to protect us and our well-being. And so I'm gonna channel my inner Mary Baker here. And I'm going to say, affectionately, don't be an LMI. Don't be a last-minute end-in. All of this work involves a great deal of detail and coordination. And, you know, really, that's a translation about the dignity and respectful process that's intended for our ancestral remains and cultural items to come home. And so, it's just hopefully it's something that might be helpful for you all too. Thank you.
Right. I am Shane Pequano. I'm the port director here in Oklahoma City for Customs and Border Protection. And yes, you may be confused. We do have a port of entry here in Oklahoma City. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I just hope I can give you guys some information on how to get a successful repatriation with as smooth as possible. In 2020, I was part of a repatriation that came from Finland when I was stationed in Dallas. I went back, when I was invited here, I went back and looked at that interaction to see how I could use it as an example to help you guys today. And when I looked back, it all started with a lot of advance notification. They reached out, they told us what day it was coming, when it was coming, how it was coming, and who was going to be part of that particular group. So me as the supervisor on duty that night, it made my job extremely easy because I had all the answers to the test before it got there. When the party arrived, we met them at their arrival gate. We were able to get them processed in, and we were able to get them down to where the items were being repatriated. And in this particular case, they had coordinated with the airline to where the airline honor guard actually showed up and showed where showed respect to the items that were being returned. Those items they had another flight, and those got to that next flight extremely easy, and they got them home. So I was very proud to be a part of that, to make that such an easy transition for those items to make it home. So I hope I can just answer any questions that you guys may have on maybe how to get in touch with a port of entry, how to give them advance notice on who's coming, what's needed for it to come in, any information that you may have, or at the very least, I can at least show you how to navigate it to where you can get into contact with that person. I'm here in Oklahoma City. We're a very small office here in Oklahoma City, but my phone number is all over the website, or all over the internet. All you have to do is Google CBP Oklahoma City, and our phone number is right there. If I can't answer it for you here locally, I'll certainly find you an answer. Just to give you a little bit of background, CBP operates through a field office structure. There's 20 field offices throughout the United States. Within those field offices, there's 324 ports of entry. There are 14 ports of entry in what we call pre-clearance that are stations outside the United States. Most of them are in Canada with our CBSA counterparts, and we have a few in Ireland and the Caribbean as well. So finding a port of entry, there are many options that you can choose from. So my recommendation is if you're doing a European repatriation and you're flying from Oklahoma, well, we don't have an international, I know it's World Airport, but it's not an international airport. Okay, you're gonna take that flight from Oklahoma City to, say, a JFK or to an O'Hare or one of those larger airports, and then when you're returning, you're probably gonna return to one of those large airports before you make it here to Oklahoma. So I would recommend you reaching out to that larger port of entry on your return. Prior to your departure, reach out to that large port of entry and try to coordinate your return. These larger port of entries, they have what they call a PSM, a professional service manager. They're at every one of these large ports. You're more than welcome to call them and ask to speak to a PSM. And that way the PSM, they will help coordinate your arrival back into the U.S. That's how we worked it on the one in 2020, and it went very smooth. So the other thing that we recommend is prior to departing, depending on the repatriation, you may want to consult with a customs broker. Customs brokers are listed on the cbp.gov website. And again, you can easily do a Google search, licensed customs broker. The licensed customs broker can help you with the permits and things of that nature on getting these things repatriated back. So just some tips. But like I said, the PSM is a good way to go. And that way it can help you guys for a smooth transition. If you guys have any questions or anything on how to navigate that, or everything's on the cbp.gov website. If you need a specific port of entry, all you have to do is Google CBP, locate a port of entry, and the map of the United States will pop up, and you can click on that state that you're traveling into, and all the ports information is on there, to include the field office. If you want to deal directly with the field office is there as well. So I don't know. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they would need? No? Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the Association on American Indian Affairs for allowing me to speak today at this beautiful convention. My name is Catherine Bechard, and I am First Nations on my maternal side, and I live in Treaty 4 territory in Regina, Saskatchewan. It's home of the Cree, the Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota nations, and homeland of the Metis Nation. I spent 11 years as a Border Services Officer, and currently I am the Regional Indigenous Affairs Advisor for the Canada Border Services Agency's Indigenous Affairs Secretariat. The Secretariat was formed after a Minister's Special Representative's report in 2017 identified border crossing issues and concerns of First Nations communities who lived along the border. We are made up of both Indigenous staff and allies, and since 2018, we have grown from a staff of 3 to 28 full-time officers, full-time staff comprised of policy analysts, engagement officers, and regional Indigenous affairs advisors. Our work at the Secretariat is divided into 4 areas: policy, engagement, operations, and people. Our operational staff, as the relationship holders with Indigenous people, need to be equipped with the tools and knowledge that they require to provide service to our Indigenous clients in an informed and respectful manner. As such, my work is to build cultural competency amongst our officers by providing training and advisement on respectful handling and processing of Indigenous items, as well as training on Indigenous issues and things that are going on with immigration and different changes. This work is where my experience with repatriation came in. NMAI and Jackie reached out on behalf of a First Nations community that they had been working with. This nation was close to the border, and they were wanting to bring back some items into Southern Ontario. So they wanted to ensure that they had met all the requirements necessary for bringing these items back smoothly and without any incident at the border. Because Canada Border Services Agency enforces over 100 acts and legislations, regulations, and international agreements on behalf of other government agencies, it kind of gives us a bird's eye view of all of the process and all of the requirements necessary. It can be complex at times, and it can include many different requirements. So things such as, does this rattle come from a species of turtle that is now protected? Or does that robe have fur from an endangered animal as identified in the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, or CITES? Those items would require an import permit and an export permit. Things like feathers from meadowlarks, which are controlled under the North American Migratory Bird Treaty Act, or eagle feathers that are controlled and regulated under CITES and the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act in the USA. Those are regulated by US Fish and Wildlife, and they also require permits. So if delegates are traveling with their own items, do they need permits for those items to enter another country? Do we need to prepare them in advance? Do nations and communities need to hire a broker to import these items? And if so, who's going to import them on behalf of the community? If they choose to bring the items back themselves, which requirements are necessary for declaring the goods at our ports of entry? And how can we help our officers be prepared in advance? And that's where Jackie's memo came in. We were able to submit those in advance so that everybody was notified. They knew what was coming. They had flights. They had a description of vehicles and people. And it's not to be nosy, it's not to interfere, it's to make sure that when they do arrive at the border with their items, that those items are treated respectfully and that they're processed without any incident. So we are actively trying to engage with nations, Indigenous leaders, museums, and institutions well in advance of the physical repatriation, so that last hurdle of the process is a positive one. Our greatest worry is that delegations will arrive at the border with their items to be repatriated and they're missing a permit or a key piece of information. This would result in these items being held or the return of the items back to the US or internationally. As we build our knowledge and assist with more and more repatriations, our experiences and lessons learned are being shared along with distinct protocols, procedures, and practices for working with each individual nation. We are sharing this with other government departments and with our own agency and our frontline officers, so that we can build their cultural competency and their understanding of how to process Indigenous travelers at the border with respect. We have also been able to identify gaps and certain requirements in laws and legislations which create barriers and challenges in the repatriation process. So it's basically a case of you don't know what you don't know until you need to know it. So we are striving to learn and grow and share all of our understandings and procedures with other government departments. While there's no obligation for nations to reach out to us or engage with us at any time in the repatriation journey, we do hope that they will. Our work with nations and communities is foremost to respect their wishes for as little or as much facilitation as they deem appropriate. We have held things like homecoming ceremonies right at the port of entry in Calgary. It was right at the airport, and over 45 members of the community were there to welcome home Chief Crowfoot's regalia from England. But also communities have decided that they want to come back quietly without any fanfare, without any pictures or anything, and we respect their wishes. We're there to help. This work is one way that we tangibly and meaningfully can make a positive impact in the lives of Indigenous people. It is reconciliation in action. It's not just words. Returning these items home where they rightfully belong will help promote a positive cultural identity for future generations of Indigenous people and ensure the successful reclamation of cultural ceremonies, protocols, and practices which had been stripped from them generations before. Canada Border Services Agency's guiding principles are protection, service, and integrity. And I can think of no better way to put these principles into action than helping Indigenous nations with the successful repatriation of their ceremonial and sacred items. So you might ask, how does this information apply to me in the US here? How does this affect me? Well, oftentimes when there are requirements for import permits, there are also requirements for export permits from the country they are coming out to. So we can help reach out to colleagues, not only in Canada, but in the USA, make connections with departments such as TSA, US Fish and Wildlife, US Customs and Border Protection, so that all of the permitting requirements are met. It's often difficult for delegations and communities and nations to know who to ask, which department to contact, and we're here to help. We've created a website so they know how to reach us, and we've also created a checklist that could be helpful to communities and museums that are considering repatriation. Attending events such as these and getting the word out that we are here to help is also important to our work. And I'd like to thank Jackie and the NMI for all of their support and their friendship and working so hard with us to make sure that these repatriations are successful. Thanks.
Just going to take this off then. I think we've got some time, and any questions are more than welcome, but maybe I could ask a few questions that might help get the conversation started. Kathy, I know that you had mentioned the understanding sort of the shortfalls in the laws and policies, but I'm wondering if you can talk about that specific example, because I think it's helpful when you don't know what you don't know until it happens.
Yeah, so we were helping a First Nation in Canada with the repatriation, and one of the items was a staff that had meadowlark feathers. And so our department had looked it over, and they thought everything was in order, and then it was sent off to US Fish and Wildlife, and there was an officer there that said, whoa, there's a meadowlark feather on here. You need a permit. You need a special possession permit. So we reached into our Canadian Environment Canada fisheries people, or fish and wildlife people, and tried to obtain the permit on behalf of the nation, or tried to at least give them the information on how to obtain the permit. and they didn't meet any of the criteria. So those permits are only issued to institutions, or to research institutions, to museums, to airport people for danger of clearing the runway, and for taxidermy. And the community didn't really meet any of the criteria. Now, they were willing to, last case, they were willing to get the permit under they have a small cultural center, and that might have been an option. But one of the delegations was very tenacious, and he was a lawyer, and he had some contacts, and he ended up contacting a minister in our federal government who wrote an exemption letter from that permit. But there's just so many permits that are needed for these items. And, I had argued with the person. I said, well, but it's from Canada. It's a Canadian feather, like it's a Canadian bird. It's coming back to Canada. And as I was very not so politely schooled, birds are not Canadian or American. They are North American. They fly over the border, so therefore they are protected under these acts. So, so there's just so many nuances, and it seems like every repatriation there's something that comes up. Whether it's the community's need to get an import account attached to a business number so that they can import them, or whether it's these permits that are needed. So that's why we're trying to work together with other government departments. We enforce them at the border. They're not our legislations, but we're the face of it. So when we're at the border and we're holding these items, or we're saying you need the permit, we're the people that, people aren't so happy with. So that's why we've formed an intergovernmental working group to try and bring some of these groups together and identify some of these issues that we've come across, some of these gaps, some of these places where current legislation that is in place to protect animals, and it's in place to protect, the black market sale of items. It doesn't really fit with the spirit of reconciliation. It doesn't really match.
And I think part of that was there was the potential of being that requirement of requesting like a tax ID or a social insurance number, which was offensive because that was being returned to a sovereign nation. And so there was another part of that. So there's interesting little things where the law hasn't caught up. And so if it's happened there, I don't doubt that we have the same here in the U.S. And could well be wherever you go. So it's just, you don't know, sometimes you don't know, but it really is helpful in developing those relationships so you can, start to work through some of these things. And had it not happened, you guys formed you proactively formed a committee to start working on it and addressing it. And it's something that is being addressed, and, not for nothing, had that not happened, people would, tribes might have, or First Nations, I should say, somebody might feel compelled to provide their social insurance number and be accountable for that, and that's not right. So I think that is, it's an amazing effort to recognize that as something, but actually do something about it. So thank you, Kathy. I applaud you and your team. Let me ask you both a question. So do you guys use the same acronyms? Like, would we understand, like you were talking about POI and PSM, and do you guys use the same acronyms?
I would say yes and no. When I served for 2 years in Canada, and I had no idea what the Q was when I moved to Canada, and I learned that was the line. So there are little things, little nuances, between our two countries. But for the most part, there is. In where I was stationed in Canada, we would sit right next to a CBSA officer, and we would work hand in hand with each other. So there was a lot of crossover, but there was not a lot of crossover. So.
And I would say, with regard to the permits or the requirements for food, plant, and animal, they probably are mostly the same. So CITES is an international trade on endangered species. So if, you know, if I said this country, this community needs a CITES permit, he would definitely know what I'm talking about. And so a lot of those requirements are the same. And like we had mentioned, if usually if there's an import permit required, there's an export permit required. So that requires you to get both permits and to stop at it on your way out, and then to have that verified on your way in as well.
So would you both be able to speak a little bit to, you know, what if an individual were traveling, and I guess it could be domestically or internationally, but if they were traveling with their own personal medicine, their own, you know, things that they were going to use for blessings when they got to maybe a museum for a consultation experience, or they're just traveling. So, you know, they've come out, they've gone to an international museum, and now they're coming back through the U.S. So maybe it would be helpful to kind of place that in terms of what's the difference also within the U.S. between TSA and CBP.
So just the difference between TSA and CBP. CBP is the legacy U.S. Customs. Way back when, after 9/11, U.S. Customs went away and we became CBP. But they're the first people you see when you arrive back from an international flight coming from Canada or Mexico. We're the first entity that you see upon your arrival. TSA, they handle everything, you know, from domestic travel when you go to the airport to take a flight from point A to point B. But in regards to taking something abroad and maybe using it for a blessing or something of that nature, we would recommend that you call the port of entry, any port of entry, and you can request to speak to an agriculture officer. You can request to speak to Fish and Wildlife. We work hand in hand with Fish and Wildlife. There are a lot of days that Fish and Wildlife show up to ports of entries to work side by side, officers and agricultural specialists. You can ask to speak to an agricultural specialist supervisor. There are a lot of in and outs of agricultural products. Some are permitted, some are not. So you would want to get an idea of maybe how much you should take with you. That way, you know, upon your return, you don't have to run the risk of something getting confiscated or detained, and things of that nature. So I highly recommend that you do reach out to these port of entries and just have a discussion with someone, because when it comes to the agricultural side of the house, they're very knowledgeable. They're all scientists. They all require degrees in some type of biology or something like that. It's a minimal job requirement. So you have some people that are very knowledgeable, especially regionally. Maybe something that's more prevalent here that isn't maybe on the West Coast and things of that nature. So they can certainly educate you on that and let you know, yes, you can, or sorry, you know, so.
I was just going to say, when delegations have been traveling, we will contact our CATSA, so that's our TSA in Canada, and let them know the flight number, who's traveling, what time they're going to be arriving at the airport, so that they know who's traveling with the items, and they can prepare their officers for when they're getting screened, so that they're showing respect for their items. So they're working with us really and doing a great job there. They've become great allies. When the delegation went to the Vatican, we had a delegation of probably 300 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit leaders that went to the Vatican to see the Pope, to get a few things back and for an apology. That was a couple years ago. And our Indigenous training program had created some information that we shared with the Italian border forza. So we reached into our liaison officers overseas. We provided them with the information, because a lot of Italian border officers would have never seen sweetgrass. They'd never know. And so we provided them with any exemptions for these items, anything that would need permits. We informed the travelers, the delegations, that this item might need a permit, so maybe don't take that one. So we work very closely with our liaison officers overseas to reach into their contacts. We did that when there was the return to the Blackfoot Confederacy as well with the folks in England. They reached into the border officers over in England, and they provided them that information that who was traveling, when they were arriving, what they were traveling with. So everyone's prepared in advance. There's no surprises, and that works really good. So we can encourage everybody, if you're traveling with larger delegations and you're going to be leaving the country with your items, we're not trying to be nosy, but the more prepared everybody can be. Everyone came back and said that their experience was amazing. There was no issues, no problems at the border, so it works well.
Do you mind if I ask a question to the panel? Thank you. Thank you all for your presentation and for being here. I appreciate the information. This question is, I guess, for the panel, but mostly for our local CBP officer. You know, you mentioned that you had experience dealing with repatriation, which I think is great. I was wondering, you know, you mentioned all these different ports of entry across the United States. If a tribe does call like the local, you know, CBP officer, are they going to have to start like educating them on the fact that there's certain cultural protocols that need to be followed, or like is there any training for CBP officers? Like, are they going to be completely shocked, or is this going to be normal to them? I know it's probably varies locally, but like how much is it going to be on a tribe to educate versus CBP just understanding this is a process? So thank you.
Yeah, so I'll take me for example. I grew up 5 miles south of here, from Oklahoma. I'm a part of the Sac and Fox Nation here in Oklahoma. I was raised around it my whole life. I certainly understand the cultural aspects of things. CBP as a whole is a very diverse agency. You may have somebody that grew up in the boroughs of New York who now lives in North Dakota. When I got hired by the agency, they sent me to Laredo, Texas, and I was not familiar with the Hispanic community, so I had to learn. So you may have to educate them. The more knowledge they have, the better. It just depends on who that person is and what they may have. Great knowledge, they may have little to none. So the more they know, the better they're going to respond to it. And we do have we have cultural training. You know, we're trained every year. We have to get recertified on it every year to understand, because we deal with people from all over the world. You know, the way that somebody from the Middle East may be coming in is completely different from somebody from Mexico. So you want to make sure, you know, certain cultural, you know, are met, you know. So you may, the short of it, yes, you may, but you may not. It just depends on where it's coming to, where it's coming from. So the more information they have, the better they're going to be able to serve you to get that process done.
Hi, we have 2 questions coming from the chat. One of the questions is, she says, I'm curious to know from the panelists' experience, are repatriations almost always couriered by hand, or what are some other situations they have seen?
I think it's both. It just sort of depends where it's coming from, how many items, and the ability for communities or nations to travel. So we've had both use of custom brokers when they came over from England, because they had to be shipped a certain way at a certain temperature. They were sealed, but we've had people hand bring things, and so we've seen both, and I think it's common for both.
Yeah, the repatriation we did in 2020 was cargo as well. You know, it was packed in crates and things of that nature. And then, you know, here in Oklahoma City, we've experienced stuff coming by a normal carrier, whether it be UPS, DHL, one of the FedEx, something like that. So, or a hand carry. You know, larger airports and stuff like that. So it varies.
I would say the same at NMEI. We've kind of done everything. Hand carry, there's been FedEx Custom Critical. We've done planes, barges. It's been a variety, and so it really, again, I guess it would go to what is the item? We really work with the tribe if they would prefer to do the escort back? We've rented U-Hauls. I mean, we've done like a little bit of everything, and so it really just depends on the size and what the tribe is interested in, or First Nation is interested in doing. Yeah.
Thank you. The second question is coming from Tim McKeon. He would like to know what steps are currently being taken by the United States to ensure that no cultural items or archaeological resources are being exported from the U.S. absent a permit as required by the STOP Act. Thank you.
Yeah, so export-wise, export is difficult in a lot of ways because the items can get out fairly quickly. I think once you know an item has been taken, it's very important to contact us and you can let us know. That way we can kind of look for it and hopefully stop it by that carrier before it gets out. Another thing is that we do not only do we check people coming into the country, we check people leaving the country as well. We have that type of authority. So if say it's been stolen and it's a hand carry, somebody's put it in their luggage or something like that, we encourage you to contact the port of entry and let us know. That way we can be looking for that item. We understand that this person doesn't, or contact your local law enforcement. They will contact us. And that way we can try to stop the exportation of that before it even happens. Now, after the fact, it gets very difficult, but the more information we have, we may be able to work with our foreign partners to get that item returned, because like CBSA, we do liaison with UK Border Force. We do liaison with any entity in France and Germany. I've worked with all those agencies. So we do have, in DC, we have a centralized hub for export control and stuff like that. So you could contact a port of entry and request them to speak to them to hopefully they could find that item for you. Because so if it does make it out, the best case scenario is you can get it back. So I hope that helps.
Hi, this is Shannon. I want to just clarify what I think that question was about, which I think it was about the STOP Act. So when the STOP Act passed, it basically put into law the protection of our cultural heritage from being exported. And so what we've heard from the Department of Interior is that the act is not being implemented because there's no implementing regulations yet. But we know even with NAGPRA, when NAGPRA was passed, NAGPRA work started on November 16th, 1990. Even prior to the regulations being passed, museums were operating under the act to develop inventories and other information and getting their house in order, so to speak. What we're not seeing out here, and I don't know if anyone on the panel can answer this question, and I don't know if any of our friends, maybe Domestic Martin or Sam has already left, can talk a little more about this. But what is happening now that the STOP Act is law? Are things, because we don't know that people are exporting our items. This is an ongoing long-term problem we have. So we don't know when our items are being taken across borders, and we rely on customs and others to see those. So what is the federal government doing anything in preparation for the regulations, in being educated about the STOP Act, so that that work is starting now instead of waiting until these regulations go through their process, which may be another year or longer.
From my perspective, no. I mean, we look at it as something's leaving the country. In these scenarios, it seems more of a nefarious way of doing things, correct? I mean, we would love to stop it, but a lot of times when these items are smuggled out of the country, they're either manifested as something else, they're in someone's luggage, and just like I'm trying to bring knowledge is power here, knowing that these things are happening, it's more knowledge for us that these things are leaving and the STOP Act is not being enforced. So I think the more that we understand that and the more that it becomes to light that we understand that this situation is occurring, that helps us know what to look for and things of that nature. Hey, this is, when it comes to things happen in trends. So we'll see an influx of something leaving, and then it'll go away, and then it'll come back, and so the fact that we don't know that it's occurring, it's hard for us to stop it. And I think the more knowledge that we have that this is happening, the better chances we have of making sure that this is done.
So until the STOP Act regulations are passed, then what can we do as Native Nations and other advocates to make sure that Homeland Security is aware of what our items are like? It's not like they're made of different elements than any other Indigenous people's cultural heritage that is protected from import into the U.S. So what can we do until those regulations are passed to advocate with Homeland Security to do something now and start training now?
Well, it starts today. I mean, I'm here,
Did you hear that, everybody? It starts today. We're going to educate Homeland Security.
I'm certainly going to
export.
let my management know that this issue was brought up, and try to educate them. Hey, the STOP Act is in place. They're seeing an influx of items that are leaving the United States. Where are we at on educating the larger port of entries as to where, to be looking for these type of things? I think, like I said, if they don't know, they're not going to be looking for that. And I think from a customs perspective, if you're looking for something, you're going to find it. If we don't know that it's actually leaving and it's a problem, you're not going to find it. So, that's best, but I will certainly bring it up, and I will talk to, we have a cargo division there. So most of these items I would assume would be going out via cargo, whether it's parcels or large cargo shipments, and I would love to sit down and talk with her about it and see what we can do.
Yeah, likely that's probably not the case with our items. In fact, the Association on American Indian Affairs monitors domestic and international auctions, and we've even now seen those domestic dealers transferring items internationally even after the law has been passed, and those sensitive items from those American dealers are still winding up in foreign auctions even now. And so the dealers who are selling our sensitive cultural items are still out there and are taking advantage of the fact that no one is doing anything even though there's a law passed. And I hate to even say that because it, in a sense, advertises it to anyone who's listening in, who maybe not have the greatest motives. So I'm just wanting to encourage everyone and make you all aware of the issue. Please reach out to Homeland Security. We do have, is there a national tribal liaison or someone that...
CBP has a tribal liaison. as well. I would say too, we work a lot with Homeland Security investigations. They are the investigative branch of Homeland Security, and they do, when it comes to these auctions and things of that nature, you know, they're a resource as well. You can call them and try to speak to someone and advise them of what's going on. You saw an item on an auction and things of that nature. They
Yes,
can
and
assist.
FBI art crimes
Yeah.
team as well.
Yeah.
So we are in touch with them
Yeah,
when we
because
see those
we
things. Yeah.
recently had some pot from the Byzantine era that we caught.
Some pot?
No, a little pot, and we worked. It came from an online auction, you know. And speaking with the person that brought it in, there was complete ignorance that they were taking somebody's property, and I think, you know, we had to educate him on the significance of taking that from a country that it didn't belong to them, you know. So I hope that maybe you could reach out to HSI, is what they're called, Homeland Security Investigations, and they too look into those type of things. But if you need to, contact a port of entry. CBP works with HSI every day, and they can get you in touch with the local office as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks for letting me pepper you with questions.
No problem.
And now I get to pepper you with questions. We have a follow-up for you, so you're just going to love us over here. As a follow-up, the prohibition on export was self-implementing, and there currently is no permit system. Shouldn't I be asked to verify that I'm not carrying these items when I buy my airline ticket, like with many other things? I can repeat that, yes. So as a follow-up, the prohibition on export was self-implementing, and there currently is no permit system. Shouldn't I be asked to verify that I'm not carrying these items when I buy my airline ticket, like with many other things? I think they're referring to, like, when we're asked those questions about lithium batteries and everything, shouldn't that be added to the list?
I mean, that would be for the airlines. The airlines are private companies, so that would fall on them.
I think
know?
it was more one of those like general ponder to the world type questions,
Yeah,
now that I'm
so-
thinking about it. So we have another one. There are routine steps made for drugs and other contraband by customs, i.e. use of dogs. Are there any new polices under stop for random luggage searches or shipping cargo?
Could you repeat it one more time?
I sure can.
Sure,
There
you
are
can answer.
routine steps made for drugs and other contraband by customs, i.e. use of dogs. Are there, and also the swabs and everything, are there any new police efforts under stop for random luggage searches or shipping cargo?
No. I mean, all cargo coming in is subject to inspection, so it's just a matter of finding the item and conducting an exam on it. So, but dogs or anything like that, no.
Okay.
And can I add to that, Shell?
Of course.
Those are really good questions, and I think those questions should be put forward to the Department of Interior and State Department as they're trying to develop the regulations, because that's, there is nothing, right? So yes, those are really great ideas, and yes, that probably should be included, but the regulations aren't developed yet, so there's nothing. And so what we're hearing from our panel today is that there's nothing to implement the STOP Act at all. Nothing is happening with the STOP Act at all. So I think the first step we need to take is making sure that we have a law in place. It could be implemented now without regulations based on the legal terms as they are. And I think we need to do some work to make sure that the government understands that we need that to happen.
Yes, absolutely. And Karen Stevens also mentioned, so it sounds like a great time also to campaign for airlines to add these items to their lists as well. International Martin, he wanted to ask, is there a way to make the auction houses report any international buyers so that the export could be prevented that way? Thank you.
I mean, not that we're aware of, and yeah, it may fall under, you know, another jurisdiction, FBI or someone like that, when it comes to the actual auctioning and notifying of international buyers and stuff like that.
Sorry, I think basically what I'm getting here from the chat is they're just, you know, unfamiliar with what is available and what has been implemented and what hasn't. So this has been really good to clarify that right now we just don't have anything, and now's the time for advocacy to make that happen. So, thank you.
I'm here now. Sorry. I just want to say, whoever's online, these are great things. And I appreciate, they're great things that are coming from great presentations, right? You all sparked so much. I have a question, and I actually really love that you're standing behind me for this. I have a few different friends coming out of Arctic Village who we met at various front lines, and not to set ourselves on fire and avoid the things that Perry is avoiding in the book, but they've gone about using Facebook Marketplace to buy back relative items like seal purses and things that are just, yeah, this modern black market, if you will. And given how much cybersecurity has gone into monitoring Facebook and other realities, whether that be from child pornography, whatever, is that something that you see a potential for in your realm to start using for some of these conversations? I'm also thinking about just like the pride of people that do these illicit activities of posting, and like there is this weird thing that they do, right? Everyone has a token when they're a part of these criminal activities. So yeah, in particular, I bring up Facebook just from some recent trauma, but attempts at activism I have friends trying to do on their own.
So I would say, like at Canada Border Services, we have intel and investigations officers, and I know that they routinely monitor Facebook, and especially local, so we'll have them everywhere, but they monitor Facebook for marketplace, for black market things, for illegal alcohol, tobacco sales, like all kinds of things. And so it could be something that is on their radar. You know, it's difficult to monitor things like Shane said, leaving. I mean, I don't know, I would love to bring up the statistic of how many trucks travel through the border a day and how many cars go through the border a day, and you couldn't stop every one of them. But I think that those are great ways that we can put into our intel officers and our investigation officers' heads, like this is a thing. This is something we need to be watching for, you know, not just guns and drugs and tobacco. Like these are important issues as well. So if it's not on their radar, we can put it on the radar to start watching things like that.
I just had a question regarding antiquities. We have a lot going on in past world wars or on military things where even our own soldiers will bring things in, and we later find out it was something trafficked or very cultural appropriate to that where they were. But why does not ours fall under that? I mean, I guess because we're native, or our stuff isn't as important as something that is thousands of years old or something. I'm just, when we're talking about this law, why do we have it for other cultures and nations, but we're not doing it for our own? I guess that's my question, because you see a lot of things coming in with antiquities and things from other cultures and nations, and it just seems like Border Patrol or immigration points of entry are right on top of it. So that's why I'm asking. Thank you.
I mean, from my perspective, we treat it all the same, whether it's an antiquity from one country or not, to us, we consider it an antiquity. And so it's very difficult to find. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's hard to find these things. In my conversations leading up to this with Jackie, we've never had a smuggler call and tell us what their intentions were. So it makes it difficult to find these things. Number one, it's extremely difficult. The Byzantine pot that I was talking about earlier, like that was the first time we had found something like that in Oklahoma City. It was a big deal, and the Oklahoma City Port of Entry has been around for a long time. It was the first one. So they're very difficult. They're smuggled in very, I wish I could just tell you there's one way they do it, but there's not one way they do it. I've seen pre-Columbian artifacts smuggled through a taxi when I was stationed in Laredo, Texas. Something's manifested as something, and it turns out to be a cultural artifact. It's very difficult. It could be, we may think it's a lamp, and it's not a lamp, you know. So it makes it very, very hard. But from our perspective, if it belongs to somebody, we're gonna take it. We're not gonna discriminate as to what it is and who it belongs to.
The only thing I would add is that there's a fine line. So when we talk about, so why are you not stopping people leaving the border with these items? We also have to remember that every single day, Indigenous people cross the border for ceremony, for celebrations, and when they're crossing with their own items, it's a fine balance between stopping them and harassing them. And you know, and I guess it's just it's thought. It's very simplistic sometimes to ask, like, why are you not stopping, or why are you not doing these things? But we have people every day traveling with their own personal items, their own personal ceremonial items, and I would question everyone in this room. Would you want to be brought into a room and stopped and questioned about those items? So it's an education. We can do better. Like I said, we can put it on radars when there are auctions and things, but there's a really fine balance because people every day travel and take their own personal items out of the country, and they attend ceremony and they come back with those items. So we have to remember there's legitimate reasons for taking items across borders, and it's a very fine balance. So, definitely there's work to be done, and I think, if you're looking to change things, lobby and write letters, but we have a job to do, and we just try our best.
Just to kind of close the loop on that really good question, I think the whole purpose, that really is the purpose of the STOP Act, that was implemented to help address those kinds of issues. So anyway, I just wanted to add that it was passed and it was signed, unfortunately to no fanfare, but it was signed and it is law. But what we're seeing is that it's the implementation, it's the acting on that, it's putting it into practice. And it doesn't trickle down where it needs to go until it does. And so what we're seeing here is that there is a gap in that. That's where there is an issue. And I really appreciate, Kathy, you saying that there is a fine line, because it's on one hand, it's the insult of having items show up online at an auction house, and then we hear these stories, we know these stories of people getting harassed when they're traveling with their items going across the border. So yeah, this is going to be marking a new time, a new day, but part of that is going to be personal sort of self-awareness. If these are your personal items, think ahead. What do you need to do to make sure that you're not harassed, and what is it you can do to help protect yourself in that realm? If that's contacting a local agency, the local agency that you're near. If it's TSA, I take your point, Kathy, earlier about. To me, I hadn't really thought about it, but if you're in the U.S. and you're traveling to a different country. I think if I heard you correctly, what you offered, which is CBSA, and the Indigenous Affairs Secretariat rocks, let me just tell you. But what you were offering was that you would help that person make a contact in another country through the complement, through your whoever that agency is, whoever that sort of customs and border agency is of that country. That seems like that would be very helpful to know, because you wouldn't necessarily think about that. So all of these are all things to kind of take into consideration. I just wanted to add that. Sorry, Sheila, go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. And I want to say this correctly. I wish that I had gotten to know Naja Roby, who is from the Canadian government. She's the Director of Policy and Government at the Museum of History in Canada. And I wish I got to know her at a conference, but I didn't. I got to know her over the attempted sale of a human skull in North Carolina. And the story was that the skull came from Canada into the United States. And I reached out to Naja. I'm like, somebody's got to know this, because how can this happen? And the country was responding. We had done a podcast over it and got a lot of responses from it. And we had reached out to Naja to try to make a connection, like, what can we do? Because the auction house in North Carolina was saying that because NAGPRA came up, and the sale of a human skull, and it was a young juvenile skull. And then they said, well, it's not Native American, which how they're logged. It wasn't investigated, I think, properly, but the rule was when they moved from Canada into the United States, that they came through the border with it. And it's not the case where you're mistaking it as a lamp or something else that could be questioned. It's a human skull. And my question was, and at the time, I was like, how? He showed the receipt or something. They claimed that they bought it from a house in Canada and then brought it into the United States, and they were auctioning it in North Carolina. But this young juvenile individual that was displayed, grotesquely displayed during this auction, it was the local community that responded and was resisting on a great response. I was fortunate to have friends out there, and I said, will you go? Because I learned like the night before the auction was to take place. And I said, will you go and find out what's going on? Will you take some pictures and will you send me some feedback? Because this isn't right. But the Indigenous community out there is the one that responded, and they all gathered around and they put up this huge fight for this individual who had nobody to stand up for them. And even though we couldn't, as much as we got, NAGPRA doesn't work for us. We were reaching out to NAGPRA. We were looking for something that would have gave us a hook, to say, you can't do this. It's not right. And our ethical laws didn't come into play here. We were looking for something more foundational. But the fact that it came across the border, and it was unmistakably a human remain, and because someone said, we have a receipt for it, that's where my issue was. Is like, we had nobody to protect or to fight. We had no standing ground to fight on. Reaching out to legislators in that state, there was so many people that a lot of people on different levels were reaching out to try to stop the sale. From my understanding, the sale was stopped, but we had no follow-up after that. And Naja and I communicated greatly on that for an extended amount of time, and we were never really able to come to a conclusion as to what happened. But speaking of the Border Patrol, it's a human skull. And I just didn't see how it was so easy for them to provide it and just say it was legal to bring into the United. I don't know what could have happened. I think we were all at loss for what do we do? What can we do? But had it been found in the United States and had we been able to prove it, there are some laws that protect them here. But from an international standpoint, them bringing the remains here into the United States, it was up for grabs at an auction house. And I think that's one of the issues that's still laying out there, because if it happened again today, if it came through the Border Patrol, no matter which port of entry they reported it to or wherever it crossed, what could have been done? Could there have been anything done? And has anybody ever thought about that?
I mean, when it comes to that, human skulls coming in, if it's, they're prohibited. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I don't know when this occurred, how it occurred, where it occurred, but for the most part, we encounter it all the time, and those items are confiscated. So speaking to the exact scenario that you're talking about, I don't have enough knowledge about that specific scenario to give you an answer, but I can tell you that people do from all over the world try to bring these things in, and we do stop them at the port of entries.
I just wanted to add a point with the question that was dealing with social media. Social media is my forum. I handle social media for the Commemorative Air Force, and I just wanted to let you know we have been involved in several federal investigations, well, our family itself with the military and then other things. And one of the things that I know is a big stumbling block for you guys have people checking stuff out, but keep in mind too that there are different laws that oversee social media in different parts of the world. There are more protections in Canada, for example, for their federal agents to be able to have interactions with social media entities, and than there are in the United States. And then Great Britain is another example of where they have laws, and EU just enacted a whole bunch of them. So that's a huge barrier, and if that's a concern of yours, then you have to reach out to your local elected officials to make changes to that so that there's more accountability. Meta, for example, just laid off tens of thousands of employees, and where do you think they came from? Not from the money-making sector, but they came from the areas that were doing oversight and making sure that, you know, racist and illegal activities weren't going on. That's why so many of your posts, when you report them, never go anywhere. So I just wanted to clarify that. That doesn't fall on these guys. That's elected procedures. If we don't have laws to protect us, then there's nothing that they can do about it. And I just wanted to point that out to you guys.
We're probably at the end of time. I realize that, but I did want to give a big shout out to Naja Roby and her team from who came from Canada, who came all the way here from the Canadian History Museum, and it's a big deal. And you know, we've got Kathy Bechard, who's also here representing Canada, and you know, it's interesting that we start to see this more and more. We've got International Martin, who's been part of this process for quite some time, and this is becoming the new normal, right? This is what this connectivity and the fact that the media folks were here in these last couple of days. I mean, that means, you know, they cared enough to be here, right? You know, even just thinking about some of these things where it's like, well, we've got a law, but we're not actually really doing anything. Uh-oh. You know, it's all about these opportunities. Thank you, Shannon, for, you know, the opportunity to have these kind of, you know, nuanced discussions, because there is the, you know, these really interesting things that are happening with a lot more international repatriations with Canada. Not just First Nations coming here, but in the other direction as well. And, you know, getting the opportunity to hear some of your questions and then hear some of these experiences. There's obviously a lot more we all can learn and know about, and we just got to keep talking, right? So thank you all very much.